Your genes hold the answers to your family's overall health. I'm Dr. Paula Krupstad, and on the Get to the Root with Hope for Healing podcast, I sit down with experts in genetics, functional medicine, and family care to explore what's really going on beneath the surface so you can stop guessing and start healing. From personalized insights to practical tools, we bring you whole family wellness that starts at the root. Welcome to the Get to the Root podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Paula Krupstad, and joining us today is Steve Hoffart. Steve, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Really great to be here.
Yeah, Steve is the host of the Trusted Pharmacist Podcast, and he's the owner of Magnolia Compounding Pharmacy. Steve, we're going to take a deep dive today into Low Dose Naltrexone, but I wanted you to explain to everyone that's listening. First of all, you are a PharmD. What does that mean?
Yeah, that's for sure. So doctor of pharmacy is what that means. It's just we take a deep dive not only into pharmacology, but a PharmD actually allows me to have a little more advanced degree. Obviously, we do all the pre-pharmacy stuff just like medical school and those type things, but we take a deeper dive into medications, how they affect the body, not only with just medications, but supplements, metabolic pathways, and those type things. And I think the big thing for me as a pharmacist in terms of having a PharmD that's allowed for is actually going back to school and having a little more patient involvement, but more importantly, being a bigger part of the healthcare team because we're taught a lot more how to integrate in the healthcare team to bring the value in terms of the pharmacognosy, how drugs affect the body and turn the overall healthcare plan. And that's kind of where I think a PharmD comes in. And we have a lot more rotations and a lot more specialty areas than I did back when I actually initially got my BS.
Yeah. So as far as like pharmacies go, can you also explain to everyone what a compounding pharmacist is?
Yeah, so it's going back to the things that pharmacists did back in the day. So keep in mind, early pharmacy days, there weren't commercially available pills in a bottle on the shelf. You just grab out, count, and put them in a bottle. I think many people think that's what a pharmacist does. We just went to school to learn how to count. Well, that's not what we did. And the compounding pharmacy takes it a step beyond because what we've learned is, especially, and you know this in your practice, as we get down the road, there's a lot of personalization when it comes to medicine. And much medicine nowadays, it isn't N of one, it's like N's of tens of thousands. And that's where we've gone to. Well, compounding pharmacy goes back to initially what pharmacists did, and that's coming out with customized formulas specifically for patients for specific reasons, allergies, dosing mechanisms, certain mechanisms of action. So a compounding pharmacist allows you to be able, as a practitioner, customize exactly what you want for a patient. Let's say somebody has an allergy to something, a dye in a product, we can take that out. Let's say a child needs a medication that only comes available for an adult. We can turn it into a liquid. Those are the things that compounding pharmacy does and allows for customization and specialization, where unfortunately just pills in a traditional pharmacy just don't allow for sometimes.
Yeah. I tell you, I love compounding pharmacies. It has helped us treat so many people, especially kids, with special formulas. Now, we get a lot of folks that come to our practice and they say, "You're holistic, you're functional. Why are you prescribing a drug to me?" And then they're like, aren't all pharmaceuticals bad? And we kind of go through all of this, and I'm thinking some of the common things that we prescribe are based on what people's precision genetics show us. And you are a low dose naltrexone expert, and I've hosted a lot of people that have talked about this. So I'm going to hit you playing the devil's advocate with some of the questions that I get, and I would love to hear your take on this. And so it's not just people hearing from me over and over again. So, okay, so here we go. So what is low dose naltrexone? Isn't it an opioid?
Yeah, that's a good one. That's what we get all the time. I even have doctors call me like, "Oh my God, I can't write for that. That's a controlled substance." It's actually it's an anti-opioid. It's the exact opposite. It actually blocks the opioid receptor. And so what happens is this drug was developed back in the day when we had people who had opioid addictions and different other type of addictions, because we've learned this opioid receptor plays a big role in the brain in terms of our addictive natures and things, especially opioid medications. So when somebody back in the day, I got addicted to an opioid. The way they found out to do things was give them an opioid blocker, which is what naltrexone is, to set on that same opioid receptor and compete at the same time. You could take a narcotic, or you could take this, and this blocks it and makes it non-effective. And that's what the drug was originally developed for. Now, you mentioned this term, but Steve, it's a pharmaceutical. We try to be more holistic and integrative. Why would we do this? Because that's what makes drugs unique. Drugs have something called hormesis, and it's this bell curve. And what happens is, depending on what we're trying to use the drug for, at low doses, we may not see much. We get to the upper edge where we start seeing the benefit, but then if we give too much of a drug, we start seeing a negative effect. And the way that I like to explain that is with low dose naltrexone, there were some early studies early on saying not giving it at like 50 to 300 milligrams, which were used to take and prevent somebody from taking an opioid. We're talking like 3 milligrams, 4 milligrams, maybe 6 milligrams at a low dose. It affects the immune system in a certain way. So as you mentioned, one way the drug does work is low dose naltrexone blocks that opioid receptor for a short period of time. So what happens is your body makes natural opioids. Believe it or not, that's what's kind of crazy. It's weird how things in nature work, where a plant can produce certain types of compounds that look like these opioids, but your body makes the same thing. So what happens is the theory was initially we take and block that opioid receptor for a short amount of time. Low dose naltrexone has a short half-life, which means you put it in your body, it comes out very quickly. And then whenever it comes and leaves the body, that opioid receptor now is back alive again. It's like, hey, I'm not being blocked. And your body bursts out a certain amount of these natural opioids that your body makes called endorphins. And these have a benefit because what most people don't realize is your immune system has these same opioid type receptors on them. So that's one of the things it does. The theory is it has the ability to have your body make your own natural endorphins by boosting the level by temporary blocking. It boosts up. But the thing we found out over time is this low dose also plays with something called TLR, toll-like receptor. And toll-like receptor is a certain systems in the body that has inflammatory, that means creates inflammation, and anti-inflammatory called cytokines. These are signaling molecules that tell all these processes in the body to do. And if there ever was a reason to understand why functional medicine exists, this stuff's complicated. And if you don't look at these mediators across all of these systems, then you kind of miss the boat. And that's the other thing that low-dose naltrexone does. It modulates or works on these TLR receptors that control good inflammation, bad inflammation, to modulate TLR. So it actually has a dual mechanism that it can do in terms of opioids and TLR, and that's where the real benefit comes.
Yeah. You bring that up, and that's one thing that we do here, especially when we're thinking about children on the autism spectrum or people dealing with autoimmunity, potentially infertility or chronic inflammatory conditions. We do their precision genetics, and the wellness blueprint is what we do here through Fagron, and we identify those challenges that those individual people have, and we don't use it for everyone. And someone was, saying, well, they recommend it for everybody. No, we don't recommend it for everybody, but the majority of sick people who come to us have those receptors that aren't working properly. So, all right. So low dose naltrexone versus high dose naltrexone. So you mentioned 3, you can even go really ultra low too, right?
Yeah, so that's the unique thing. So there was a lot of studies back out in the 80s and 90s that talked about using low-dose naltrexone. There was a doctor actually in New York named Dr. Bahari. And what he found out is he was treating patients with HIV. And if you understand about anything with HIV, the virus itself suppresses this immune system, and it makes it where you can get what's called opportunistic infections, pneumonias, and different things. Because HIV isn't what kills anybody. It's an immune system that can't take care of these things we're exposed to all the time. And he read that low doses, like we said, commercially available, it was about 50 to 300 milligrams was used to help with opioid addiction. But he read this thing between like this 3 to maybe 6 and maybe even 9 to 12 milligrams. There's this ability for this low-dose naltrexone to take and control the immune system. Now, what's really interesting is you and I are probably going to talk a lot about using low-dose naltrexone to calm an overexcited immune system. But he actually used the drug to help stimulate the immune system for people with HIV so that their immune systems could then attack these opportunistic infections and help them live. That's the power of LDN. At low doses, it modulates that immune system. So if it needs to be calmed, it'll calm it down. But if it needs to be stimulated a little bit, it'll stimulate it. But it's only at these low doses. As a matter of fact, I've read some studies showing that higher doses of naltrexone, and this isn't to scare anybody on here, higher doses of naltrexone actually have a very negative effect on the immune system. And that's the crazy part. That's why you have to work with a practitioner and a compounding pharmacist to understand the precision of doing this to get those doses right. I know you do that in your office. And we'll talk a little bit about dosing, but you're right. The average person that I see falls in that 3 to 4.5 milligram range mostly. I see a lot more variability now than we used to because we'll talk about the reasons why. But yes, 3 to 4.5 milligrams versus 50 to 300 milligrams. And that's what makes it low dose naltrexone.
Thanks for that explanation. One thing that I think our society, our culture is so used to is effect. So I always tell people that the changes that you're going to experience are very subtle. You're not necessarily going to notice anything immediately. So as far as ramping up on the dosage and also common side effects, what are some common side effects that people may experience with it that you hear as a pharmacist?
So what you just brought up is the problem I see with low dose naltrexone now. A lot of doctors hear about it, or you and I talk about it, and they go to another practitioner and they're like, I need this LDN thing. Steve said 3 to 4.5 milligrams, but that's where they end up at. That's not where they start at. And I can tell you from my own experience, I don't think anybody can't take LDN. I think many people are started too high or have a tolerance to it, and they didn't work up properly. So back to your question, common side effects if you get too much low-dose naltrexone to start with, or you hit what's called this magic, I call it like the magic dose or your sweet spot dose. Most common thing that I see is headaches. And that's how I tell patients all the time, your doctor should start you at a low dose. And I can tell you, you and I are seeing sicker and sicker patients that have hypersensitized immune systems from all types of conditions. So we can talk about those in a second. But that hypersensitized immune system, what I have learned is those patients need to start lower and lower. When we used to start LDN back, probably we started doing this 15, 20 years ago, was we would start at like 1.5 milligrams, I've got patients now that are so sensitive that are starting like at 0.25, sometimes even 0.1 milligram because they can't tolerate it. And you would think, come on, Steve, like 0.1 milligram. And if you saw how small 0.1 milligram is, you couldn't even see it with your naked eye. Like you wouldn't even see that. But there are some people that can start that low and are that sensitive and they'll get this headache. And what I tell patients as they're working up is if you're rocking and rolling along and everything's going good, and I tell people to always ask 3 questions every time they start it or they increase the dose. Question number 1 is, hey, I feel better. And as long as you're feeling better, we'll keep going up on the dose. Second question is, I don't notice anything. I've taken this for a week or 2. I don't notice a thing. No problem at all. And number 3 is, hey, I have no side effects. As long as you can answer yes to those 3 questions, you go up. But what will happen is you'll typically go up and then you'll have side effects. And I'm going to talk about, to me, what I call side effects and then to me, inconveniences. A side effect means we've overshot you. And with that, I'll say that commonly is a headache. And that's our like muscle aches and pains and fatigue. That is my indication is we're doing something with the immune system that with the naltrexone that we've gone too high. And a lot of times for that patient, you just back it down a little bit, or i.e. you started them too high and you need to go back. That's what I've seen. Because sometimes we'll start people on 1 milligram and they will be sensitive to it at 1. We go back to 0.25 and work up slowly. And sometimes they can get to 1 milligram. So fatigue, tiredness, headaches, that's my sign you overshot you. The other big side effect is, and I don't always look at it as a side effect, I just look at it as an inconvenience, and you got to do with it what you want to, is crazy vivid dreams. Yes, it can affect your sleep, but I don't see it so much as affecting sleep. What I see it as is this has the ability to do amazing things in your brain, reducing inflammation, memory recall. There's so many things that LDN is used for PTSD. But one of the things, this is the way I explain it, is you'll take LDN at night before you go to bed. We'll talk about whether or not you should do that later. Take it at night, go to bed. Let's say your dog passed away like a year ago, And you will have such crazy vivid dreams at night when you go to bed. You'll wake up in the morning, you're like, oh my gosh, where's my dog? Like, my dog is back alive. Some people just don't like that, depending on what the trauma is or what the dream is about. And if that's the case, there's things we can do. So the crazy vivid dreams is the other thing that I see that sometimes can be a little nuancing. And then the last thing is if you take it by mouth, I do have some people complain of like nausea or constipation, but that's the part where a compounding pharmacy can help you have success and eliminate that also.
Great. I'm really glad you went all over that. So one of the things that I see is I see people with disrupted sleep. So I'll go ahead and use it in the morning, but also you mentioned this before, the LDN goes away, but then the body makes its natural endorphins and metenkephalins. And so when do we need that? We need that during the day when we're facing the challenges of everyday life. I just learned something new from you, and it really makes sense as far as people being a lot more sensitive to the higher amounts. So I tell folks, if you're really fatigued, if you're constipated or you're having headaches, try to stay there if it's not debilitating. You kind of went between, side effects versus inconvenience, and a lot of times that fatigue will pass. But I guess if I think about it, I'm having kids that were even doing topical that were having to back down a little bit more and start or just hold them at, say, 1 milligram instead of being able to go up. So thanks for going through that. Now, what are the different forms of low dose naltrexone that people that you can make?
Yeah, it's kind of unlimited. I would say the most common, obviously, for adults is capsules. We do
Okay.
lower capsules. We start out low, we work up slowly, and then ultimately we combine it all into one capsule. So that's one option. Option two is we can do liquids, and then you have the ability to easily titrate the dose, pull it out, up the dose slowly based upon the same product you have versus having to change. That's another option. We can do sublingual liquids. Sometimes we do a smaller dose, and instead of taking the liquid by mouth and swallowing it, we hold it in our mouth and allow it to get absorbed through the oral mucosa, which gets in the system a little faster, which can have some benefit, but also can eliminate some of the stomach issues. And so that's number three. And then in your practice, which I think is really pretty cool, is doing topical. We have the ability to put naltrexone in bases, and naltrexone's an easy molecule with a certain type of base to drive it across the skin. So instead of it going through your stomach to get in your body, it actually goes through your skin to get in your body, but you see the benefit. So those are probably the four biggest ways that we do naltrexone. And the neat thing is they all have their own unique advantages and abilities to titrate to be specific for that patient.
Now, let's compare common pharmaceuticals, an antibiotic compared to low dose naltrexone. Can you just compare and contrast when people say, well, it's a pharmaceutical agent? What's an antibiotic doing versus what LDN is doing to our gut?
Yeah, so as a pharmacist, I would say everything's risk benefit. And we all know with anything, I think there's a fine balance of how much is good versus how much is bad. Now, antibiotics, now you got me on that one. That was a challenge. Antibiotics are great when you need them. I mean, without modern medicine and acute infections, antibiotics save lives. Now, the not having antibiotic stewardship or using them when they aren't needed. But here's the way I would explain LDN if you want to think about it, because it is a pharmaceutical, and some people are like, I'm not for pharmaceuticals, I won't do it. But let me do my best to try to explain it. So one, think about something like exercise. We know a little bit of exercise done precisely, exact in a certain way, creates a certain amount of stress, which the body benefits. It makes all these good chemicals. We have repair. We have more health, but we have to have some of it to be successful. But if you over-exercise, you create stress and it tears down things. The next thing is I think about like we have certain small stressors in life that we know a small amount of stress provides benefit. You look at trees that are put in a bubble that never have wind and they don't have all those type things. There's been these studies that you feed it the best food and everything. Those trees are actually unhealthy because they don't have the stress of life. So a little stress is good. We don't want a hurricane or a tornado. That's bad, right? I also look at it something like allergy, like immunotherapy, right? We give a super small dose of an allergen to try to get that immune system, to get it used to things, to get it moving in the right direction, to modulate it where it needs to be. That's the way I look at LDN and all these. It's just enough to get a therapeutic benefit, but not so much to cause a side effect. And we've got a lot of long-term data on LDN to show that it's pretty darn safe long-term. It's not like something that just showed up yesterday that we don't know much about.
Yeah. I have a family that their child is suffering from pretty severe eczema and allergies, and they asked their allopathic pediatrician about LDN, and they said they just didn't know enough. And I'm thinking I have written thousands of prescriptions for LDN and seen the benefit in children, and it just grieved me because I was thinking this child would benefit so much from LDN based upon their precision genetics. Now, Steve, a lot of people ask me, well, how long do I have to take this? And, that's kind of a loaded question. So, as a pharmacist, how would you answer that? And then we can kind of dialogue a little bit about that.
Yeah, that one's a little loaded. Here's what I see with most people with LDN. When it comes to just like I say outlook on life, quality of life, a lot of people who are highly inflamed, within the first couple weeks of LDN, they feel like if it's working, reducing inflammation, especially for the ones it's going to work on, they notice, oh my gosh, I have a little more energy. I have a little more pep in my step. I don't notice my aches and pains. But for a lot of people, that's not really what we're chasing. But this chronic inflammation they have, that's one of the big things that just sets them up for failure. So I would say people feel better, especially like Hashimoto's, I'll use for example. Most of those people, they don't have the headaches, the fatigue, the tiredness, and they're like, oh my gosh, this makes a difference. But to be honest with you, for most of the medical conditions you and I are talking about, and especially in your children that you're doing precision genetics for, this is a lifelong thing. And what I've seen, especially like for autoimmune conditions, long-term like COVID, those type things, we look at most people I see it needs about, once we find the sweet spot dose, about 3 to 6 months. That's kind of my give it a chance. Some people are like, well, I don't notice anything. I'm like, well, I can promise you it's not hurting anything. LDN's relatively inexpensive. There's a lot more things we could spend money on, but if we can spend it on this, let's try this and give it 6 months. Now, the one thing that I will tell you in my experience that I've seen is if we're using LDN for skin conditions, specifically eczema, psoriasis, I'm not saying it's going to be sooner, but on those conditions, I've just seen, because I just feel like there's just deep-seated inflammation. Some of those patients, I'll say, give me a year. I know it sounds kind of crazy, but that's been kind of my rule of thumb, but that 3 to 6 window for most. And then, like you said, 6 months to a year on skin conditions. What I found is this: many people will get on it, they'll take it for years, and they're like, I don't think it does much anymore. And then what happens is they're like, I'm not going to get that prescription filled. They don't fill it. And then the next thing you know, about 6 months later, they call me up. It's like, you know what? I didn't think that LDN was doing anything. But all of a sudden, and that's what's unique, you don't stop it and it does stop working tomorrow. They stop it. And then about 3 to 6 months, they're like, oh my gosh, this came back or that came back, or I didn't realize how well it was making me feel. It's because it's subtle. It's not like it's going to magically change the needle. And you and I, I'm sure, will talk about it's one piece of this integrative puzzle. It's not the end all be all, but you put it with other stuff, it's powerful.
Yes, that's so true. Like all of our patients with autoimmunity, we try to put them on that. And then especially people with inflammatory bowel disease like Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, any type of colitis at all, because it also has this migrating motor complex type thing. Would you care to just talk a little bit about that, the benefits of taking it orally when you've got gut stuff?
Yeah, 100%. So there's a lot of really good information. Well, let's back up. Your gut, if it's inflamed, I don't mean to be mean, and I've interviewed so many people, it all starts in the gut. If you don't work on fixing that gut, you're just going to, whether, like you just mentioned, your precision genetics says where it's going to rear its ugly head if your gut's sick. For some people, it's skin. For some people, it's cardiovascular. For some people, it's cognitive issues, autism, you name it, but it all starts there. And I have seen LDN be so powerful in terms of calming an inflamed gut. Like, it's important there. And I think because keep in mind, you've got a massive amount of opioid receptors in your gut. So you get that direct effect, not only we're counting like the direct benefit in terms of the gastrointestinal inflammation, but in terms of also then you get absorbed, then you get the systemic benefit. But you mentioned the migrating motor complex. There's also some thoughts about some peristalsis issues, all of these things that are so important to gut health and gut integrity. Because if we have a lot of inflammation in the gut, that just drives other inflammatory processes later, leaky gut, that peristalsis issue and migrating motor complex sets us up for gut dysbiosis. There's that whole host of things. And I'll tell you, out of all the conditions at LDN that I've seen people on heavy duty biologics, and these are drugs that shut the immune system off, but they put them on these drugs to help their gut symptoms like Crohn's. I've seen a lot of patients with LDN, with diet, with lifestyle do these things and be able to actually get off their biologics working with their providers. And to me, that is powerful because if you can get somebody off a biologic, that is a game changer when it comes to your immune system and your overall long-term health.
Yes, we've seen that, and that's what we aim for, but man, if you've gotta use a biologic to really kinda cool things down.
Mhm.
But yeah, it just totally shuts down the immune system, and then, you're vulnerable. Okay, so thank you for answering so many of the questions. I just think that, well, autoimmunity and infertility. Steve, would you be able to tell us a little bit about LDN and its use in infertility and conceiving and its safety in pregnancy?
Yeah, that's a good one, and this happens all the time. What will happen is, let's say you have a patient who's got Hashimoto's, autoimmune condition of the thyroid, and obviously there's inflammation driving that. A lot of those people are low in vitamin D and iron and all these other things. And what happens is they get put on LDN to help with that condition. But in the process of being put on LDN for that condition, we start working on gut, we start working on diet, we start optimizing vitamin D, using omega 3s, all those different things. The next thing you know, she turns up pregnant. Because guess
Yes.
what? The body's pretty amazing to protect itself in terms of not getting pregnant. Well, all of a sudden you start cleaning things up. The body's like, hey, let's be reproductive and let's let that happen. It's amazing how nature does that. So then I get that question of, oh my gosh, can we keep taking LDN? What do we do? And I will tell you the majority of the doctors that I have found with those patients will leave them on LDN. There's some pretty good data out there to show. I don't think I've come across anything that says absolutely no, and especially the low dose naltrexone, because the other thing is there's some thoughts about using LDN early in pregnancy for these ladies who have inflammation to make sure they have a good, successful pregnancy. Because you know this as well as anybody, if you have a lot of inflammation, especially if you have thyroid conditions and a lot of inflammation early on in pregnancy, that could turn into some pretty bad things throughout the trimesters down the road. And then once a child is born, then you're dealing with a whole host of other things. So that's a great call out. I get that question all the time is, can I continue it? And I'm usually like, well, that's a discussion to have with you and your doctor. But if it was me and my wife, I think you probably ought to stay on it. So that's a good call out.
Yeah, yeah. Dr. Boyle, he is a doctor over in Scotland, I think, that has published extensively on the use of LDN and infertility. And then, the LDN Research Trust, you're familiar. I think we've both
Mhm.
spoken for them. But man, it's amazing stuff. What you mentioned at the very beginning, Steve, is so important about hormesis. It's a little bit may not be enough, and then you reach this sweet spot, and then if you've got too much, and that's a principle with so much of what we do. So, and I really like what you had to say too about, yeah, maybe you'll be on it the rest of your life. I think the most common thing that I hear is, yeah, I stopped feeling my LDN and then my joints are aching and I'm getting, the arthritis worsens and they're like, oh, I think I need to go back on it again. What do you think about, like, if I ramped someone up and they were on, say, 3 milligrams or 4.5 milligrams for a long period of time, went off of it? What do you think about just restarting them at that higher dose?
Yeah. So my rule of thumb is, and keep in mind, there are certain times you have to get off of it. So I'll give you an
Yeah.
example. So let's say you have to go in for a surgery and you know they're going to use a narcotic. Those patients have to come off LDN because it'll blocks the narcotic from setting on the opioid receptor and they won't be effective. So in that patient, to me, my rule of thumb is as long as you're not on it or off of it for more than 2 weeks, I think you can jump back on right where you were. If you're off of it for more than 2 weeks, believe it or not, you're still going to feel pretty good. Most people I found get 6 to 8 weeks after being off of it before things start gradually sliding back where they are. But if you're on like a 3, 4.5, and you've worked up to that and it's been more than a couple weeks, I probably would recommend to start lower. Now you kind of know where you can get to quicker and you may be able to ramp back up. But I do think that's fine. I'll tell you the other thing I think I'm seeing a lot more now is people are on the drug more long term. There's a lot of data. I've been going to conferences here and people talk about doing an LDN holiday. and actually not taking it every day, because it's the same type thing, and it's like the body really doesn't do anything the same way at the same time of the day. There's circadian rhythms to hormones, to insulin, to cortisol. There's all these circadian rhythms. And there's some thoughts are, if we kind of do the same thing with LDN and this opioid receptor, maybe it doesn't get as sensitive. So there's some thoughts about pulling it off, letting it kind of redo its thing and putting it back. I've seen some of that, but there's a lot of really unique ways, because sometimes people will be on it for 2-3 years and like all of a sudden, oh my gosh, it stopped working. It gets complicated because a lot of things can affect the immune system, but I'm seeing a lot more people talking about like a little bit of an LDN holiday, coming back to it. But I will tell you, most people who do really well with it, like you said, stay on it long term. And in your case, you mentioned you're doing it with children who have precision issues that really long term probably need to be on that. And I could understand how a parent might be, oh my gosh, I'm putting my child on this now. Like, how long can they stay on it? And from what I've seen and know, they can be on it kind of indefinitely, as long as they're being monitored. Because like you mentioned, like some of the biggest risk, the only things that I see, one, opioids. The other thing that I've seen in adults, if I have somebody that's on high dose prednisone for something really kind of strange, or the other one I won't touch is if somebody is a transplant patient. If they've had like a liver transplant, a kidney transplant or something, we don't want to do something. They're on these transplant drugs and that's all immune mediated. So I'm like, we don't touch that one at all. But honestly, beyond that, those are the only things. Like I've seen people on LDN, even with biologics at the same time. So there's a lot of things that I don't think people realize that you can take LDN with, that it really can be synergistic and may help and not be harmful.
Yeah. A lot of times the thing that we talk about is what is our goal? When if somebody comes to us and they're terribly inflamed and we're trying to get them out of the hole and we throw everything at them, then maybe we could pull things away down the road, but we want to have things in there like you said, vitamin D with K2 and omega-3s and some other immune modulators for inflammation for the different systems. We've got cannabidiols, we've got endocannabinoid system that we can modulate, but like you said, the toll-like receptors, and then the JAK-STAT system too. There are things that, curcuminoids and other things that we can use. So, well, I want to thank you again, Steve, for just kind of unpacking that and hearing from you. And where can people find you?
Yeah, no problem at all. So probably the easiest way is magnoliapharmacy.com. We go to our website. I'm on a lot of social media platforms, from Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. You can find me there, constantly doing a lot of this type of information share as a pharmacist, giving my perspective on traditional medications, supplements like you just mentioned, how they all work together, because they all have a purpose if you use them for the right things. And so those are probably the best places to find out about what we do with Magnolia Pharmacy.
Great. And the name of your podcast, the Trusted Pharmacist Podcast?
You got it. Yeah, the Trusted Pharmacist. You can find me on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. We're there. So just a lot of good wellness talks. I've had you on. It's just a fun share of like-minded individuals that are working to help bring health to people in a special way by really understanding the truth about how the body works.
I want to thank you again, Steve, for just educating people who are listening to understand a little bit better the safety of low dose naltrexone and what you see as a pharmacist. Wow, the lights went off. Perfect timing. All right. Well, thanks so much. And if you like what you heard, just be sure to write us a positive review. And thank you so much. Take care.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Thanks for joining us at Get to the Root with Hope for Healing. If this episode helped you, follow and share it with someone who needs it. And leave a review. It helps others find us too. For a free consultation, visit our website at gettotheroot.com with the number 2 and schedule a welcome call. We'll see you soon.